As a scholar who has dedicated a lifetime to the study of the Dharma, I have often contemplated the pivotal moments that have shaped human consciousness. Among them, few can compare in sheer spiritual and historical magnitude to the event that unfolded in a tranquil deer park in ancient India some 2.5 millennia ago. It was not an event of political conquest or earthly power, but of a quiet, yet world-altering, revolution of the mind. This was the moment Siddhartha Gautama, having transformed into the Buddha, the awakened one, delivered his first sermon. This seminal discourse, known in the Pali language as the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the discourse on setting the wheel of the doctrine in motion, is the very bedrock of the entire Buddhist tradition. It is the fountainhead from which all subsequent streams of Buddhist thought, whether Theravada, Mahayana, or Vajrayana, ultimately draw their source. To understand this first sermon is to understand the heart of the Buddha's realization and the fundamental principles of the path he laid out for humanity. The metaphor of turning the wheel is profoundly significant. A wheel, once set in motion, has its own momentum. It is a symbol not of a static, dogmatic pronouncement, but of a dynamic, living truth being released into the world, a truth that would roll across continents and centuries. Unstoppable, fundamentally altering the spiritual landscape wherever it touched. This was not merely a speech, it was a cosmic event. The inauguration of a new spiritual era. In this exploration, we will delve into the profound context that led to this moment, undertake a deep analysis of the revolutionary content of the sermon itself, and contemplate the enduring legacy of the wheel that was set in motion on that fateful day in the deer park at Sarnath. Buddha's first sermon, Turning the Wheel of Dharma. Part 1. The Path to the Deer Park, the Prelude to the Sermon. To fully appreciate the weight of the Buddha's first discourse, one must first understand the profound silence that preceded it. Following his attainment of full enlightenment under the Bodhi tree at Gaya, the Buddha spent 7 weeks experiencing the bliss of liberation, Vimuctisukha, and contemplating the profound, subtle nature of the truth he had discovered. This truth, the principle of dependent origination, paticcasamuppada, was the very mechanism of existence, a complex web of cause and effect that explained both the arising of suffering and its cessation. His initial inclination was not to teach. A profound hesitation arose in his mind, a thought that has been recorded for posterity. This Dharma that I have realized is profound, hard to see, hard to understand, peaceful and sublime, unattainable by mere reasoning, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. But this generation delights in attachment. For them, this truth would be too difficult to see. The world, he perceived, was shrouded in the dust of greed, hatred, and delusion. To attempt to teach such a subtle, counterintuitive truth to beings intoxicated with worldly pleasures seemed a futile and wearying task. This was not the hesitation of a being hoarding his knowledge, but the compassionate concern of a master physician who fears his most potent medicine will be rejected by the very patients who need it most. It is at this critical juncture that the ancient texts describe a divine intervention. The great deity Brahma Sahampati, perceiving the Buddha's reluctance and fearing that the world would be lost without the benefit of his discovery, descended from the heavens. He appeared before the Buddha and implored him to teach, arguing, "Lord, let the Blessed One teach the Dharma. There are beings with little dust in their eyes who are wasting away through not hearing the Dharma. There will be those who will understand." This powerful appeal, born of cosmic compassion, tipped the scales. The Buddha surveyed the world with his enlightened vision and saw that humanity was like a lotus pond. Some lotuses were still deep in the mud of ignorance. Some were slowly rising, but others were already at the surface, their buds ready to bloom in the light of the sun. For the sake of these beings, with little dust in their eyes, he agreed to open the doors to the deathless. His immense compassion had triumphed over his hesitation. The decision to teach was made. The next question was, to whom should he teach first? Who would be capable of understanding this profound doctrine? His thoughts first went to his former meditation teachers, Alara Kalama and Uddaka Ramapada. They were highly developed spiritually and would surely grasp the teaching quickly. However, with his psychic insight, he perceived that they had both recently passed away. It was a great loss for the world. He then thought of the 5 ascetics who had been his companions during his 6 years of extreme self-mortification. He recalled their sincerity and intelligence. and knew they were ripe for the teaching, though they had abandoned him in disgust when he had given up his extreme practices and accepted the meal of milk rice. The Buddha held no resentment. He saw with his divine eye that they were residing in the deer park at Isapatana, modern-day Sarnath, near the great city of Varanasi. With this clear intention, the newly awakened one began his journey on foot, a journey of some 250 kilometers, from Gayat to Sarnath. When the 5 ascetics saw him approaching from a distance, their old resentment surfaced. They made a pact amongst themselves. Friends, here comes the mendicant Gautama, the one who lives in luxury, who gave up the struggle and reverted to a life of abundance. We should not pay respect to him, nor rise from our seats, nor take his bowl and robe. We can just leave a seat for him, if he wants to. He can sit down. However, as the Buddha drew nearer, his presence was overwhelming. He radiated an aura of such profound peace, majesty, and serene authority that the 5 ascetics found themselves unable to keep their pact. A compelling force, born of his immense purity and enlightenment, dissolved their arrogance. One by one, they involuntarily rose from their seats. One took his bowl, another his outer robe, another prepared a seat, and another brought water to wash his feet. Yet, they still addressed him as friend Gautama, their equal. The Buddha gently corrected them. Do not address the Tathagata by name or as friend, he said. The Tathagata, monks, is an arahant, a fully enlightened one. Listen, monks, the deathless has been attained. I will instruct you. I will teach you the Dharma. His declaration was met with skepticism. They reminded him of his apparent failure in asceticism. How could he, who had given up the hard struggle, now claim to have reached a superior state? The Buddha patiently explained that he had abandoned not the struggle itself, but the 2 unproductive extremes. 3 times they challenged him, and 3 times he patiently replied, his calm certainty finally convincing them that a monumental change had indeed occurred. They now recognized that they were in the presence of no ordinary man. They prepared themselves to listen. The stage was set. Part 2. The unfolding of the discourse, a deep analysis of the sutta. On the full moon night of the month of Asala, in the serene deer park, with his audience of 5 ascetics before him, the Buddha turned the wheel of the Dharma for the first time. His discourse was not a long, philosophical treatise, but a masterpiece of practical, structured, and profound insight. It was a perfect diagnosis of the human condition and a clear prescription for its cure. The sermon can be broken down into 3 essential parts: the proclamation of the middle way, the exposition of the 4 noble truths, and the confirmation of his own full realization. The rejection of the 2 extremes and the proclamation of the middle way. The Buddha began by directly addressing the spiritual orientation of his audience, who were masters of asceticism. He defined his path by first clearly stating what it was not. Monks, these 2 extremes ought not to be cultivated by one who has gone forth from the household life. What are the 2? There is devotion to indulgence in sensual pleasures, which is low, vulgar, worldly, ignoble, and unprofitable, and there is devotion to self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble, and unprofitable. This opening statement was revolutionary. The dominant spiritual paths in India at the time largely fell into one of these 2 camps. The Brahmanical householder tradition, while having a spiritual dimension, often involved the pursuit of worldly success and pleasure. On the other hand, the various Shramana movements, to which the Buddha and his companions had belonged, believed that liberation could only be achieved through the severe punishment and subjugation of the body. The Buddha dismissed both. The path of sensual indulgence, Kamasukhala he knew from his 30 years as a prince. He declared it low, vulgar, worldly, because it binds one ever tighter to the world of samsara and offers only fleeting, superficial happiness that ultimately leads to more craving and suffering. The path of self-mortification, Atthakilamathanu he knew from his 6 years as an ascetic. He declared it painful, ignoble, and unprofitable, because it weakens the body and mind, making the clarity required for insight impossible. It is a path based on a flawed premise of a war between body and spirit. Having rejected these 2 dead ends, he offered a 3rd way, a new path, avoiding these 2 extremes. The Tathagata has realized the middle way, Majjhima Patipada. It gives vision, gives knowledge, and leads to calm. to insight, to enlightenment, to nibbana. This middle way is not a weak compromise, but a sophisticated path of balance that avoids the pitfalls of both extremes. It nourishes the body sufficiently to support a strong and vibrant mind, while practicing restraint and discipline to prevent the mind from being enslaved by sensual desire. This middle way, he then explained, is none other than the Noble Eightfold Path, the exposition of the Four Noble Truths. This is the very heart of the sermon and the core of the entire Dharma. These four truths are presented not as dogmas to be believed, but as pragmatic, empirical realities to be seen and understood for oneself. Much like a physician diagnoses an illness, identifies its cause, confirms a cure is possible, and prescribes the course of treatment. 1. The Noble Truth of Suffering, Dukkha Arya Sakka. The Buddha began with a direct, unflinching look at the human condition. Now this, monks, is the noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering. Aging is suffering. Illness is suffering. Death is suffering. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are suffering. Union with what is displeasing is suffering. Separation from what is pleasing is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. In brief, the five aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. It is crucial to understand the Pali word dukkha. It is often translated as suffering, but its meaning is much broader and more subtle. It includes dukkha, obvious physical and mental pain, the suffering of a headache, of grief, of anxiety. Viparinama dukkha, the suffering of change. This refers to the fact that even pleasant experiences are a form of suffering because they are impermanent. The happiness we feel from a pleasant experience inevitably fades, and its passing causes a subtle suffering. Sankhara dukkha, the suffering of conditioned existence. This is the most profound level. It refers to the pervasive background unsatisfactoriness of life, the inherent stress and vulnerability of being a conditioned being, a composite entity wholly dependent on other fleeting factors for its existence. It is the suffering of not having a permanent, stable, independent self. By starting with dukkha, the Buddha was not being pessimistic, he was being a realist. He was identifying the fundamental problem that his path was designed to solve. 2. The Noble Truth of the Origin of Suffering, Dukkha Samudaya Arya Sakka. Having identified the illness, the physician now points to its cause. Now this, monks, is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. It is this craving, tanha, which leads to rebecoming, accompanied by delight and lust. Seeking delight here and there, that is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for becoming, and craving for non-becoming. The cause of our deep-seated unsatisfactoriness is not an external agent, a creator God, or original sin. It is an internal mechanism, tanha, a word that literally means thirst. It is the relentless, insatiable wanting and grasping of the mind. The Buddha identifies three types: craving for sensual pleasures, kama tanha, the desire for pleasant sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and bodily sensations; craving for becoming, bhava tanha, the deep-seated drive for continued existence, for identity, for status, for power, for eternal life. It is the ego's thirst to be and to become. Craving for non-becoming, vibhava tanha, the nihilistic desire for annihilation, for self-destruction, the wish to not exist. This arises from extreme pain or despair. This craving, he taught, is itself rooted in a fundamental ignorance, avijja, of the true nature of reality. 3. The Noble Truth of the Cessation of Suffering, Dukkha Nirodha Arya Sakka. This is the good news, the prognosis that a cure exists. Now this, monks, is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. It is the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving, the giving up and relinquishing of it, freedom from it, non-reliance on it. If the cause of suffering is craving, then the cessation of suffering must come from the complete cessation of craving. This state of cessation is nibbana, Sanskrit, nirvana. The word means to extinguish or to blow out, as one would a candle flame. What is extinguished are the three fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. Nibbana is not a heavenly realm or a place one goes to after death. It is an unconditioned state of perfect peace, wisdom, and liberation that can be realized in this very life. 4. The noble truth of the path to the cessation of suffering, dukkha nirodha gamini patipada arya saka. Finally, the physician prescribes the medicine. Now this, monks, is the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. It is this noble eightfold path, that is, right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. This is the practical, step-by-step method for eradicating craving and realizing nibbana. It is the middle way itself, and its 8 factors are grouped into 3 essential trainings: wisdom, panya, right understanding and right intention; ethical conduct, sila, right speech, right action, and right livelihood; mental discipline, samadhi, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. The 3 turnings and 12 insights. What truly elevates this sermon from a simple philosophical statement to a profound declaration of enlightenment is the next section. The Buddha explained that his understanding of the 4 noble truths occurred in 3 phases or turnings for each truth, resulting in 12 distinct insights. This demonstrates the difference between merely knowing a concept and directly realizing it. For the first noble truth, dukkha, the 3 turnings were: the truth itself, sakanyana, vision arose, knowledge arose. This is the noble truth of suffering. This is the conceptual understanding. The task, kikanyana, vision arose. This noble truth of suffering is to be fully understood. This is the understanding of the task required. The accomplishment, caitanyana, vision arose. This noble truth of suffering has been fully understood. This is the confirmation of direct realization. He repeated this 3-phase process for the other 3 truths. For the second truth, origin, the craving that is its cause is to be abandoned. For the third truth, cessation, the cessation, nibbana, is to be realized. For the fourth truth, path, the noble eightfold path is to be developed or cultivated. Only when he had gained this complete, 12-fold, 3-turning knowledge and vision of the 4 noble truths, did he declare to the world that he had attained unsurpassed, supreme enlightenment. This was his claim to Buddhahood, backed by a clear and verifiable framework of realization. Part 3. The immediate aftermath, the birth of the Sangha. As the Buddha concluded his discourse, a profound transformation occurred in one of the ascetics. The text states that as he listened, the dust-free, stainless eye of the Dharma, Dhammakaku, arose in the eldest ascetic. Kandanya. He saw with pristine clarity the fundamental principle of conditionality. Yam kinchi samudayadamam. Sabam tam nirodadamanati. Whatever is subject to origination is all subject to cessation. In that moment, Kandanya became a stream enterer, sotapanna, the first stage of enlightenment, guaranteeing his future full liberation. He had the first direct glimpse of nibbana. Seeing his attainment, the Buddha exclaimed, Anyasi vata bo kandano, Kandanya has understood. And from that day on, he was known as Anya Kandanya, Kandanya the knower. This was the first fruit of the Buddha's teaching. The wheel had not only been turned, it had reached its first destination. The Dharma was not just a theory, it was a path that demonstrably led to awakening. Kandanya immediately asked for and received ordination, becoming the first Buddhist monk, bhikkhu. In the following days, as the Buddha gave further instruction, the other 4 ascetics also attained stream entry and were ordained. The awakening of Kandanya marks the completion of the 3 jewels or triple gem, Tiratana. The 3 pillars of the Buddhist faith. The Buddha, the supremely enlightened teacher. The Dharma, the teaching of liberation. The Sangha, the community of the enlightened or those practicing the path. With the formation of this first nucleus of awakened disciples, the Buddhist community was born. The vehicle for preserving and propagating the Dharma through the centuries had been created. Part 4. The Echoing Wheel, the legacy of the first sermon. The impact of the discourse delivered in the Deer Park cannot be overstated. It was nothing short of a revolution in the religious and philosophical thought of its time. And its core principles have formed the unshakable foundation of Buddhism for over 2.500 years. A revolution in religious thought. The Buddha's message radically departed from the prevailing Brahmanical orthodoxy, where the Brahmins emphasized ritual, sacrifice, and devotion to gods as the means to a favorable rebirth. The Buddha presented a path devoid of rites and deities. Where Brahmanism was founded on a rigid caste system, the Buddha's teaching was egalitarian, holding that the potential for enlightenment was open to any person regardless of their birth. He replaced metaphysical speculation about a creator God and the nature of the soul, Atman, with a pragmatic, psychological, and empirical approach. The cause of suffering was not divine displeasure but a psychological phenomenon, craving. The solution was not prayer or sacrifice but the systematic training of one's own mind. He shifted the locus of spiritual authority from an external priesthood to the interior of the human heart and mind, placing the responsibility for liberation squarely on the shoulders of the individual. The unifying framework of all Buddhist schools, the Four Noble Truths, as articulated in this first sermon, remain the common denominator and foundational framework for all schools of Buddhism. The Theravada tradition of Southeast Asia holds the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta as the quintessential expression of the Buddha's core teaching. The many complex philosophical schools of the Mahayana, from Madhyamaka to Yogacara, can be understood as profound and elaborate explorations of the truths of suffering, emptiness, and the path laid out in this initial discourse. Even the esoteric practices of the Vajrayana are ultimately aimed at achieving the same goal, the realization of nibbana through the eradication of craving and ignorance. The Four Noble Truths are the source code upon which all the diverse applications of Buddhist practice have been written. The enduring metaphor of the wheel, the Dharmacakra, or the Wheel of Dharma, which the Buddha set in motion, became the primary symbol of his teaching and of Buddhism itself. Its spokes represent the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. Its hub represents the discipline that is the core of the practice, and its rim represents the mindfulness that holds it all together. The wheel's motion symbolizes the dynamic, ongoing process of the teaching as it spreads throughout the world, confronting and liberating beings from suffering. It is not a symbol of empire or conquest, but of a peaceful spiritual revolution that is renewed every time a person listens to the Dharma, takes it to heart, and begins to walk the path. Conclusion. The first sermon of the Buddha at Sarnath was a moment of supreme clarity in human history. In a single, concise, and profoundly structured discourse, the Buddha encapsulated the entirety of his awakening. He offered a diagnosis of the fundamental problem of existence, dukkha, that is both honest and compassionate. He identified a cause, craving, that is internal and therefore within our power to address. He confirmed a cure, nibbana, that is attainable and absolute. And he prescribed a practical path, the Noble Eightfold Path, that is both ethical and transformative. The turning of the wheel was not a demand for blind faith or a declaration of immutable dogma. It was an invitation. It was a call for beings to stop, to look deeply at the nature of their own experience, and to see for themselves the truth of suffering and its end. It was an empowerment of the individual, asserting that the key to liberation is not held by any god or priest, but lies within the structure of our own consciousness. The wheel that was set in motion on that full moon night in the Deer Park has never stopped turning. Its gentle, inexorable momentum has carried the Four Noble Truths across mountains and oceans, through the rise and fall of empires, and into the hearts of countless individuals. It continues to turn today, in every meditation hall, in every act of kindness, in every moment of mindfulness, for any being who feels the pervasive unsatisfactoriness of a life driven by craving. The echo of the Buddha's first sermon remains, offering a timeless, noble, and liberating path toward the cessation of all suffering.